Welcome back to Proxy Hammer, everybody, and today we're going to be talking about the new 40k game mode, boarding actions. And we're going to be looking at my first impressions with the Craftworld Eldar. So this is a new type of game mode that GW released recently. It's been gaining some popularity, honestly. A lot of people seem to like it right off the gate. And honestly, in my opinion, it looks pretty cool. I have to say, it looks promising. I'm a real big fan of smaller type game modes, kill teams, stuff like that. Things that can really get new players into the hobby without much investment. You know, you pay $50, something like that, and you can play a smaller game of 40k. I think that's a really cool thing to do. And while boarding actions does come in at a little bit more than $50, I think it's still a great budget option for those players who are looking to see if they would like 40k. So the success of boarding actions is going to be probably pretty important for the company getting new players into the game. But as we also all know, this is GW we're talking about, and oftentimes their new game modes, quote unquote, aren't always the most successful. I mean, take a look at the several iterations of Apocalypse that they have tried to release over the years, and they just never really stuck. And, well, I have my own opinion on why they didn't stick. To be honest with you, I have a whole tirade that I could go off of why Apocalypse wasn't successful and probably never will be, to be honest with you. And hint, hint, it's because most players will run out of money before they can ever get there. So, yeah, we become broke before we can play Apocalypse. Let's just put it that way. So, without having to go too much into that, let's go ahead and get right into the video. So, quick overview of what we're going to be looking at in this video. We're going to be looking at what we know so far about boarding actions. We don't know everything yet, but we do know a lot of stuff about the game mode. We're going to be looking at the detachment and the Craftworld rules, and we're also going to be looking at how good Eldar will be in boarding action games and my thoughts on the game type. So, here's what we know about boarding actions so far. Boarding actions are 500-point games with a limited force organization. There are new rules for line of sight and limited board space that you can play on. There's a lot of narrow corridors and pathways to represent the inside of a space hulk or large spacecraft, basically. A lot of hallways, doors, and things like that. There are no monsters or vehicles allowed in games of boarding actions, which makes sense, right? You're not going to be able to have a monster or vehicle basically inside of a ship in that narrow corridor and being able to fit and fight and all that stuff. Some army abilities are also very limited, including the Eldar. There is a simplified rule set, stratagems, and traits. And of course, no ignores line of sight weapons are allowed. So mortars, tempest launchers, things like that are banned from the game. So looking at the detachment, it basically includes 0 to 1 HQ. So again, you don't have to have an HQ if you don't want to, but you can also choose to have one. Pretty powerful option in my opinion. Probably most lists will want some sort of HQ unit. You can have 0 to 3 troops and 0 to 3 elites. Now notice, you cannot take any fast attack or heavy support at all. Now, some heavy support are allowed in certain circumstances, as I'm sure fast attack is for some other factions. But for the most part, unless your army specifically says it can take that unit, then you can't take it. So, moving on to the Craftworld specific rules for boarding actions. So, you can actually include Dark Reapers in your boarding actions army despite them being heavy support. You can include up to 1 unit. Now, keep in mind though, the Exarch can still, can't take the Tempest Launcher, which sucks, right? The Tempest Launcher would have been a great weapon for this game mode, but unfortunately, it's just not allowed. Which, to be honest, is fine. It would be kind of broken to have something that ignores line of sight when you have so much line of sight blocking corridors and doors and things like that. So, Guardians can also combat squad. That means if you could take a squad of 10, you can break them up into 2 units of 5, which is really cool and something that, honestly, Guardians should have in regular games already, in my opinion. Warlocks can be taken in minimum units of 1 without having to count as a character unit, which is kind of neat. That means you can save some points on a Warlock and just have a single Warlock casting Psychic powers. You can only have 1 Exarch power, though. So if you run multiple Exarchs, only one of them can have a Exarch power. You cannot give Phoenix Lords enhancements. Now, I'm not sure exactly what enhancements are yet, but I'm guessing there's some sort of upgrade or something like that that you can give to characters in boarding actions to make them a little stronger or something like that, and Phoenix Lords cannot take them. Also, you cannot use the Hunter of Ancient Relics trait or Harlequin units. Also, probably the biggest thing about Eldar is that you cannot make battle focus moves. Even though you still have the battle focus special rule and you can retain the other parts of the rule like advancing and shooting without penalty and so forth, you cannot make a battle focus move, which is really, it kind of sucks, guys, to be honest with you, right? Because battle focus is one of those special rules that really defines Craftworld Eldar in this edition. And a lot of the Eldar point costs are kind of revolving around that ability. So Dire Avengers being 13 points a model hinge on the fact that, yes, Dire Avengers can battle focus. That's part of their points cost, right? And that's part of the points cost of a lot of Eldar units. So the fact that they can't make that move is kind of lame and unfortunate. However, I can see scenarios where if they did have battle focus, they would pretty much be impossible to hit. And I'm sure GW didn't want to make Eldar just so broken in boarding actions that no army could actually have a realistic chance of winning against them. I think there was probably a middle ground here of some sort, like maybe battle focus is limited. Instead of D6, maybe you can only do 2 inches or 3 inches minimum. Well, maybe that would be a little too OP still, but, something like that, I guess. Or, battle focus moves are at -2 or something, And that could maybe represent the tight corridors of the battle, right? So they can make battle focus moves, but they're a lot shorter. They're at -2 or -3 or something like that, right? Make it a little more balanced. Phoenix Lords also cannot perform the secure site action. Not really sure what that is, but Phoenix Lords can't do it because it's probably pretty broken, I guess. There is also a reduced range for the Gloomfield, Fieldcraft, and Masters of Concealment. So instead of 18 inches and 12 inches minimum range, it is now 6 inches minimum range. So that means that your Ranger units with the Gloomfields, if you're running a Laytalk or an army with Masters of Concealment, they will have a 6-inch ability to get light cover and stuff like that. Just like in any combat patrol game, you get 2 strands of fate dice per round, which is pretty good. Banshees are also looking to lose Overwatch Denial. So I don't know if this is a typo and they didn't just include this with the rules, but it looks like Banshees don't get deny Overwatch, which really kind of sucks. But again, probably OP considering that the corridors are very narrow and not a lot of enemies are going to get the chance to escape a unit of Howling Banshees. And lastly, Executioner has an increased warp charge of 9. So again, this is one of those psychic powers that doesn't require line of sight. If this thing was warp charge 7, you'd be basically killing model after model, turn after turn with this ability and not really being able to be shot back at. So understandably, its warp charge got increased a bit. So with all those rules, how good will Eldar be in boarding action games? So my first impression of this is that all of the units that would be pretty excellent for this game type are basically banned. And that is Warp Spiders, Swooping Hawks, Jet Bikes, Tempest Launcher, Exarch, or Dark Reaper, Exarch, etc. So that really sucks, right? Because they're jump pack infantry and they're fast attack slots. So they're not allowed, essentially. Now, I know they would be probably pretty, well, to be honest with you, overly strong in this type of game mode. Even if you took away battle focus, it would still be really good. Think about Warp Spiders, even without battle focus, being able to flicker jump and things like that away from assault units, behind corridors and things like that. It would be extremely effective and probably, honestly, broken. The Banshee Mask is also nerfed, so they don't get Overwatch Denial, which is kind of unfortunate. I think Banshees are still going to be pretty good in this game mode because they're very quick and can catch enemies very quickly. They have movement 8, they can advance and charge and things like this, and, they do very good combat damage. So I think these guys will still see a place in some boarding action lists, but they're just not going to be able to deny Overwatch anymore. So your enemy will have a chance to Overwatch them if they choose to do so. Also, of course, losing battle focus is a huge disadvantage to our faction. But I have to be fair, I think if battle focus was a a thing in boarding action games, I think it'd be a little bit too overpowered, I have to say. Just in all fairness, as an Eldar player who's been playing for years and has been playing, games on, all sorts of different tables, whenever I've had a table that has an obscene amount of, obscuring terrain or anything like that, it's more of a narrative type of table. Battle focus just really is super powerful. So it's just not going to be great for this type of game mode to have that in the game. So Executioner also, of course, is much harder to cast. And again, it would have been amazing in this game mode and maybe honestly too good, right? Having a Farseer cast that thing every single turn, killing 2 models a turn without repercussions would be a little bit powerful, right? So the occasional fail, even if you're running something like Uthway, the occasional fail with this is probably needed to balance it out. But I have to say, even at Warp Charge 9, it looks like a pretty good power still. I mean, to be honest with you. You can kill 2 models a turn with it. You can use Strands of Fate to boost your Psychic test. And you're rarely going to fail a Psychic test at that point, to be honest. So again, probably a pretty powerful ability in this game mode. So I actually think that Eldar are going to be pretty decent in this game mode. I think that even though long-range units will struggle a bit more, that's going to go for all armies. So Dark Reapers obviously are going to struggle in this game mode because they're really long-range weapons and they're not going to have easy line-of-sight access. So even though you can include Dark Reapers, they're probably still going to suck, to be honest. I think durable units like Wraithguard and Wraithblades, however, are looking to be extremely effective units. And that is simply because your enemy army is not going to have a lot of tools to deal with them before your Wraithblades and Wraithguard are going to be able to get in range. So especially Wraithblades with the Force Axes and Ghost Shields, I can see being really powerful. And maybe even in a Yunari list, I can see, or a Yunari boarding action, I can see the Wraithblades with the 2 swords being extremely effective at taking down enemies and surviving return fire. And maybe this is why Wraithguard with D-Sights secretly got a nerf. I would think it would be really weird that they would get a nerf for a boarding actions game. But again, I mean, hey, Wraithblades with D-Sights are looking pretty decent in this game mode as well. Also, we have a lot of cost-effective units with pretty good burst damage. Corsairs and Dire Avengers come to mind as 2 units who can do a lot of damage. And in the Dire Avengers case, they can also do a lot of damage while performing secondary actions. So 2 very strong units there. And also the Phoenix Lords are looking to be extremely strong as well. And I'm actually surprised they weren't banned. So this is the thing. When I saw the Phoenix Lords, even though they're limited and even though they can't take enhancements and they can't use the Secure Sights ability and stuff like that, we have a couple Phoenix Lords that can really mess things up a lot. I mean, think about it. We have Favored of Cain. We have Phoenix Lords like a Zerman who can have a 3+ invul save in a game type like this and can basically just mow down everything in close combat with mortal wounds. We have units like Kahandras who are very strong. Jane Czar is also very strong. There are, of course, Phoenix Lords that are still going to not be great, right? And we can't take Baharoth, unfortunately, because he is a jump pack infantry unit. And, of course, Fuegan isn't that great and stuff like that. But, we have several Phoenix Lords who could work really well in a list like this. And basically my thoughts of the Craftworld Eldar and boarding actions in general as a game type is this. Even though we have a very limited roster available to us that could probably be successful in boarding actions, we do have access to some extremely strong options, and I do believe that Eldar are going to be pretty good in boarding actions in general. Even though they don't have battle focus, a lot of us will look at that and say, oh, Eldar are going to be trash in boarding actions, right? And, we don't have access to Warp Spiders and Swooping Hawks and things like that because those are jump infantry and fast attack. But we do have a lot of strong options that, honestly, some of which we wouldn't even take in normal games in competitive play. Things like Wraithblades all of a sudden are looking really good because of all the line-of-sight blocking elements that are available in boarding action games. And simply the lack of really heavy shooting units is going to make Wraithguard even better. So most of the units you're going to be dealing with in boarding actions are going to be things that can kill other infantry units. Well, Wraithguard are kind of, they are infantry, but they're kind of more along the lines of, light monsters, if you know what I mean. Toughness 6, 3-up armor, -1 damage, 4+ invul on the force shields, that is. And just a really strong array of attacks in general. So I think boarding actions actually looks really fun. And I actually think, again, it's going to be very popular, especially among Eldar players. And I think it's going to be something that new Eldar players can get into the game and choose units that they like. Like if they're really into Wraith units, then they can pick up a Wraith unit. And they can have fun with the units that are allowed. I don't actually think that any of the units in boarding action games are completely useless. I mean, for example, if you take a unit of Dark Reapers and you put them on the battlefield in a regular game, they're not going to perform that well in general, right? You have to invest a lot of points in them. They're very finicky. They're very easy to kill, stuff like that. In a boarding actions game, Dark Reapers are actually not that easy to kill at long range and will most likely get several rounds of shooting in before they are either tied up in combat or shot down. So yeah, believe it or not, I actually think that a lot of units that maybe aren't viable in regular games are going to be viable in boarding actions. And just take a look at Wraith units, for example. Wraith units are something that, again, gets shot too easily in regular games, die too easily to abilities that auto-wound and stuff like that. And in boarding action games, that's not going to be as prevalent, right? There's definitely going to be a lot less really big threats that can kill you from turn one in a boarding actions game. In fact, there's probably zero big threats from turn one that can kill you. So yeah, units like that are going to have a lot of success, and I think it's going to be a lot of fun and a great way to get into the game, and I hope that this game mode has a lot of success going forward. So in conclusion, again, boarding action seems like a really good idea for a game mode that doesn't require a lot of investment. Unlike Apocalypse, and again, I kind of went on a little bit of a rant about Apocalypse earlier. Let me tell you a little bit of a story from my high school years when Apocalypse first came out. When Apocalypse first came out, I was playing Eldar, and I had just built up a 2,000 point army. And that was a lot of money for me, I scraped up every penny I could, I saved allowances, I asked for Warhammer for my birthday, all that good stuff when I was a kid growing up. And Apocalypse came out and it was really hyped, and a lot of the new events were Apocalypse based. So all the tables were being used for Apocalypse, which meant that you couldn't really play regular 40K games while these events were going on. So I took my 2,000 point army, and I remember showing up one day and they really wanted me to play in this Apocalypse event. And I had a standard 2,000 point Craftworld Eldar army with the 4th edition codex. I show up to this event, I set my guys on the table, and within one turn, everything had died. Basically, a bunch of Stompas, a bunch of Warlord Titans and stuff like that just obliterated. My entire army to the Space Elf was destroyed in a single turn of shooting by tons of Stompas, Warlord Titans, and things like that. And I think actually the only elf that survived was Eldrad Uthran, and the reason he survived is because they just forgot about him. They didn't even see him on the table. And that took well over an hour to do because the turns were so long. So is something like that really conducive to new players who can't really afford those heavy-duty assault type Apocalypse units like Stompas, Warlord Titans, and stuff like that? Absolutely not. No way. So even though that game mode is cool for players who have tons of models and huge collections, it's not really a game mode that's going to find much success outside of that, and that's why Apocalypse typically fails whenever it gets introduced. Is it cool in theory? Absolutely, right? All of us have seen the art of Warlord Titans fighting against Eldar Phantoms and stuff like that. It's really cool, right? But it's just not accessible. And the thing I think about boarding actions is that it's a very accessible game mode that puts a twist on small games. It's not just a small game. It's a small game with really simple rules, and you're fighting in a spaceship. That's really cool. And I think it's a great idea, and I hope it finds success. And again, Craftworld Eldar are looking to be pretty fantastic within boarding actions. I think they have a lot of strong abilities, and they have a lot of strong units and synergies that perform well in close quarters fighting. So I think we're going to see a lot more of this game, and I, for one, am going to be putting some boarding action games up on the channel later on after it comes out. I'm going to be playing a few boarding action games this week, try it out a little bit once the rules officially come out. And yeah, I'm going to be posting a couple videos on boarding actions. So stay tuned for that. If you guys like boarding actions, let me know in the comment section if you want to see more of that content. I'm more than happy to provide that content for you guys if you are interested. I do have a few videos coming out again at the end of this week, probably one more video, and next week as well. I'm going to be running a Wraith list this weekend. I'm going to be running a pure Wraith list that I've basically created to prove that Wraith armies are viable and can actually work against some opponents. So I am going to be running a list like that, and I will update you guys on that as it comes. I'm also going to be running a Wraith Knight list. And I do eventually want to give you guys a battle report about that Wraith Knight list. Eventually. I probably won't get to it this week, but very soon. So let me know in the comment section what you guys think about boarding actions once again. And yeah, if you have any suggestions for videos, let me know. All right, everybody. Peace out. That's going to be it for today's video, and I'll see you guys next time. Have a good one, everybody. See you later.